You might think of projects with tens, hundreds, potentially thousands of contracts at once, and that might allow people to visually drag and drop and build their contracts rather than having to write them. I call it kind of Adobe Creative Cloud for blockchain.
Alrighty. Hi, Will.
Hi. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
So, here at CownWasm, Dan Lynch and you announced that you are joining Cosmology as lead developer, right?
No. I'll be head of research and development. So, so I will be doing development, but mostly looking at how we can focus on developer experience, improve just novel products that kind of focus on pushing the boundaries of bringing Web 2-like developer experience into Web 3, but with a distinctly Web 3 flavor. So, like some of the products that fall under this research and dev category is like, for example, TERRAN.ONE, the company that I founded. We built a couple Cosmology tools like debugging, visual debuggers, like time travel debugging for Cosmology contracts, where you can actually run contracts in any JavaScript environment. So we built a JavaScript runtime for contracts, which allows you to kind of run Cosmology in your browser, your mobile phone if you want.
And what would that enable if it runs locally?
So the idea of running it in your browser is we have this JavaScript runtime such that developers can go ahead and hook into that runtime and add, let's say, a way to control React using CownWasm or using React with CownWasm to kind of see what's going on inside the contract and visualize that in the browser. Yeah. So that's just one use case. We have a demo out that kind of showcases what you could potentially do. So we built a visual sort of contract playground called CW Simulate. You can just drag and drop in a WASM binary version of your contract that you can download. We have a couple that you can kind of select down, like TerraSwap, CW4, CW20. It preloaded in the UI, so you can just get started tinkering around with contracts without having to sign up for the blockchain and load a blockchain and then connect to it and upload a file. All you have to do is just drag and drop your WASM binary and you get a complete visual simulation environment where you can kind of play around with your contract in a simulated sandbox. Yeah, so that's one of the things, and that required us to kind of go into the CownWasm code and then re-implement a lot of the things that they did in Rust and in JavaScript. But now we've kind of have like this JavaScript runtime, which can be the thing that powers a bunch of CownWasm tools. I think there was a couple that I found interesting where people are kind of using our tools to build other tools. There's, I think Cosmology is a Visual Studio Code extension that is sort of a CownWasm IDE of sorts. So what they've done with CW Simulate is they've imported it as a library and then used it to create something called CownWasm notebooks. So the same way where you have Jupyter notebooks where you can play around with like Python and which is really popular for like sharing AI ideas. You can just like type in the code and the result of the code comes out next to it. The person who made Cosmology, I forgot her name, she made an extension where you can create CownWasm notebooks and write just code that interacts with CownWasm. So it's sort of like interactive documentation for your contract, if you will, which is a bit better than writing like contract specs because you can actually play around with your contracts in code and as a notebook. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool, and that kind of falls into what we thought people would use this library for.
And how does that all fit into the mission of what Cosmology does?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so initially I kind of set out to, well, before I joined Cosmology at TERRAN.ONE, we wanted to kind of focus on the developer experience part of CownWasm because developers kind of have a difficult time getting into programming CownWasm. There's a lot of frustration. There are not any good docs. You have to kind of, I mean, the whole development experience is kind of fragmented for CownWasm. So we kind of wanted to build tools that kind of streamline everything in a way that each tool in its own right is kind of isolated and does one thing good. And then we have a sort of standard framework where each of these tools kind of work with each other. So for instance, like another project that I'm building, CW Script, which is a programming language for CosmWasm development, that would tap into a lot of the things that we've built with the CosmWasm VM in JavaScript, which would allow you to kind of write your contracts inside your browser and then run them directly in your browser via CW Simulate. So that's sort of how I expect like the tools to work together to kind of compose. This kind of reflects Cosmology sort of philosophy in kind of building a tool suite for blockchain developers. I call it kind of Adobe Creative Cloud for blockchain. And that's kind of the goal of Cosmology. And what we want to do is now Cosmology currently has a bunch of front-end tools and tools for TypeScript generation. We want to be the branch of CosmWasm within Cosmology. So I'm bringing members of my TERRAN.ONE team who kind of feel like they want to continue working on this stuff and really feel passionate about developer experience and are also very knowledgeable about CosmWasm and kind of fit in better into a more comprehensive narrative with Cosmology.
And does CW Script make it easier for people to get into CosmWasm, or is it more for advanced people like developers?
Yeah, I'd say that it'd probably be targeting, so in a sense both, because yes, CosmWasm is easy. I mean, CW Script is much easier to write than Rust, but that's not really the point. The point is that we wanted to simplify the language such that we can allow complex ideas to be expressed more fully. So the problem with CosmWasm right now is that a lot of things that we need to do in the language, they're simple to express in our minds, but they don't manifest as very clear in the code. Like one operation might take 6 lines of code and then also in many different files just to express one idea. So what we want to do is consolidate what you mean and have that reflect in the code. So we want to build a language that maps to CosmWasm as it was intended to be expressed. For how it helps advanced project or users, like you can use anything that simplifies what you do to kind of allow for more complexity in your ideas. So we think that right now it's really hard for large projects to scale to even 5 contracts because of the added complexity of each contract. But in a world where each contract becomes a lot more like simpler to express in code, you might think of projects with tens, hundreds, potentially thousands of contracts at once. So that's kind of where I see CW Script in helping advanced developers scale in complexity.
What is your vision for like all the tools working together? Because like right now, as I understand it, there's like stuff like Cosmos Kit for the front end stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you see that it will like grow together in a sense? Will there be a connection at any point, or like be clustered to a super product or something like that?
So I think that what Cosmology can work on right now, I think is a bit confusing for people to come in, just a bunch of like random little utilities. I think that bringing common functionalities that exist in some of them, like for example, TS CodeGen, Telescope, Cosmos Kit, they all have some CodeGen aspect. And if we could bring in together in more like tighter narratives what each product is about and potentially rebrand some products and reorganize them, it might be more like accessible and more easy to understand the Cosmology suite of products. Because I do agree, like there's basically a lot of tools and it's not necessarily easy to understand how they all play together. So I think that in the coming months, we might see like a lot of the Cosmology tools be like reorganized and repackaged into more logical units and how they play together. So if that is a difficult point to understand right now, I think over the next couple months, like we'll kind of reshape the creative suite of blockchain, which I like to call it.
It should go more in the direction of professional developers, or could it also spread out into the direction of like something simpler than what there is actually, like that people without technical knowledge may be able to write simple smart contracts?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think of tools as things that reduce friction and kind of connect you closer to what you want to build. And definitely the tools that we've been working on right now, they're a bit abstract, but in the future, I see the current tools that we work on as precursors to tools that are more accessible for people who don't necessarily have a technical background to start building things with blockchain. I think the ultimate goal with Cosmology is, well, first we have to our strategy has been mainly to, focus on the main pain points of current developers. I think where the research and development part comes in is when we don't really necessarily respond to what's immediately in front of us, but we can take a step back and think what might be a better idea and what might be a better approach to kind of ultimately fulfill our mission with blockchain, which is not necessarily create an open world of applications which anyone can participate in. So I think I've personally have a couple ideas on how the tools that we build can be repurposed and represented under a different light, or repackaged in a more user-friendly way for beginning developers. But I think that some stuff like CW script can be manipulated to allow for a visual programming interface, for instance, and that might allow people to visually drag and drop and build their contracts rather than having to write them. But yeah, I think that that's kind of the direction that we're heading to. It's just our strategy right now is mainly focus on the major pain points that are immediately visible.
So what kind of products will TERRAN.ONE bring to Cosmology?
I think currently the only thing that touches CosmWasm from Cosmology is probably TS CodeGen. It basically allows you to use types from your smart contract in TypeScript. So I think that the approach that we're taking when we say combining like TERRAN.ONE and Cosmology is that we have a bunch of CosmWasm specific expertise at TERRAN.ONE, and we'd like to basically include a lot of that into the tools that are currently existing, as well as create new types of tools with our combined resources of CosmWasm know-how and their front-end expertise with delivering like great user experiences. So the current products that we have at TERRAN.ONE include CW Script, our language, which currently is actively in development. I think we're about 5 weeks out. CW Simulate and various other like toolkits that are internal to TERRAN.ONE, but we were planning on releasing. I think for instance, we have like an internal toolkit for building languages and tools around building tools for the languages that we create, because we actually work on a bunch of language-based tools at TERRAN.ONE. And so we've kind of organized them into a kit where we can just experiment with languages quickly. So you can imagine bringing that into Cosmology might mean that we might like make a language for defining front ends, or we might make a language for describing blockchains. So in the future, I think that this collaboration will be like very fruitful because we're just combining the abstract and the concrete and in the research with the speed of execution. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of excited to kind of bring our teams together.
And do you think that by combining all that, does it also improve the user experience of apps? Because it's like all Cosmology and also TERRAN.ONE is mostly on the developer side, right?
Right.
Do you see anything like coming up from the UX perspective that things?
I think that the common thing that kind of we share is a sort of sense of developer empathy, which is why I wanted to partner with Dan, is because he really understands the developer and has an emotional connection to the stuff he writes. And so I think that you can think of Cosmology's tools as deep compassion for the developers just from the experience that he's had and trying to simplify that. That's why he has a really good understanding of the pain points in the Cosmos development experience. I think I bring that for CosmWasm, and that's where our main commonalities lie, is mainly our ability to kind of understand the pain of other developers. So from a DX or a developer experience perspective, I think we're making progress. But you did mention about the end user and whether that will trickle down into the end user. I think that like we'll have like a greater accessibility into the Cosmos ecosystem. So yeah, I think that bringing more developers in will kind of allow this to kind of slowly trickle down, because you're going to have people who never came into the blockchain and kind of have that alternative perspective. And I believe that as we get more developers like this, the Web 2 world will kind of seep into the Web 3, and we're going to get the experiences that we kind of know and love from the apps that we use daily, but in a more like Web3 conscious way.
And talking about people getting into that development, or starting with developing with CosmWasm tools like CosmWasm languages. Right now, it's for a lot of people difficult to get in there because the documentation is not like super complete or accessible, right? And there's not like a lot of educational material out there. Do you have a vision for like changing that, or do you see like any pain points that we all should tackle?
Yeah, I mean, I see a bunch of pain points. The problem is when you have so many different pain points and they're all in parallel domains, it's hard to know which one you should fix first because they all depend on each other. Yeah, I think that when I was at Terra, like I usually onboarded like pretty much all the developers for CosmWasm. So I think I do have a good experience on teaching them personally. And I actually been working on some CosmWasm docs that we're going to be releasing soon through Cosmology. So yeah, I think the education for CosmWasm and just for newcomers has been hard for many reasons, and I don't think necessarily that it's just because of the documentation. I think of the developer API, the community, like the dependence on community support. I think that right now, if you want to start a CosmWasm project, you pretty much have to get into the CosmWasm Discord and communicate with somebody. And it's just not very streamlined, this experience. And I think one of the goals that I had for the CW script language was for it to be the easiest way to get into CosmWasm, because I'm always about like thinking about friction and unnecessary points of friction. I think that with CW script, when you read a CW script contract and understand how it generates the code, I think I'm kind of optimistic that the conceptual framework that we've kind of built into the language is going to be very useful for newcomers into CosmWasm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of when I tried to learn programming languages. I always was a huge fan of those platforms where you write code on the left and you see stuff on the right, similar to what you mentioned before.
Right, the
a
REPL.
bit, but with that with something like a tutorial somewhere in there. Do you think there could be something in the future for CW script or?
Oh, definitely. Like I think we're already working on interactive tutorials. Yeah. I think that what you mentioned about the interactivity is very important. It's important to kind of have that feedback loop and have a direct feedback loop that it can't be too time delayed. I think that's one of the big problems with CosmWasm is that when you make a change, it's not sure like what the result is because you have a change in your mind first, and then you have to distill it down to the change in the contract that translate from your human world into the CosmWasm Rust world. And I think that translation step is quite challenging for newcomers. And then building the contract and then uploading it to a blockchain to get the results, because you can't immediately see what you've written and how that reflects in the code. So I think one of the goals with CW script was it should run in the browser and it should show what it's doing in the browser. So that's why it's built with web technologies. And that's exactly one of the goals, to use CW script to help new learners into CosmWasm.
Just for my understanding, so that means that you write it in the browser, or you see at least the result in the browser of CW script, and then you develop it, and then later you deploy it on.
Yeah, exactly. You can simulate it in the browser. Obviously, it's not totally. You can't use the blockchain from the browser yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just going to be a mock blockchain that's living inside your browser, which like LSC CW simulate.
So how can you give an example? Like how is then the daily work of a developer different?
Sure. I mean, I think the daily work is going to be. I'm going to just basically describe two perspectives. One would be the newcomer into CW script and CosmWasm in general. So the newcomer would ideally use the interactive tutorials of CW script and walk through them, which they could do in their browser and kind of learn the ins and outs of CW script, which the language is designed to match in a way that parallels what's going on in CosmWasm. So we've decided to make language design decisions that kind of match how the abstractions are laid out in CosmWasm. So when you're writing CW script, if you already know CosmWasm, it should not feel like you're not writing CosmWasm. Because the concepts and abstractions and relationships kind of carry over. We've been very careful to maintain that existing conceptual framework without adding a bunch of other stuff. So that's the perspective for a new CosmWasm developers, that they use the CW script interactive tutorials and kind of are able to test out their ideas quickly by using the in-browser simulator and the compiler. So if you're a seasoned developer, I'm imagining this now because there's not really any CW script developers today, but I believe that the ideal workflow for the CW script developer is they're going to be playing around with their contracts in their editor, and the editor should be a complete development experience. So it will have syntax highlighting, it will have static analysis that works on the contract level rather than on the language level, because the contract semantics are embedded into the language itself. And then they have a suite of tools from Cosmology and from TERRAN.ONE to kind of tap into from the editor. The idea is that they'll design and prototype their contracts with CW script. And then at the end of the day, they can also compile to Rust and generate a fully working Rust contract that if they want to tweak or just improve the performance with, they can do so. But I believe that the CW script's main power lies in its ability to be simple and composable and allow you to write your contract ideas very naturally and succinctly in minutes, not hours or days.
And you talked about developer experience. When we take a step back and look at Cosmos, where do you see the biggest breaks or the potential to improve when it comes to DX and UX from your perspective
I think that's a very good question, because there's a lot. And I think number one, we need to have more or less fragmentation of documentation, support of different projects. The thing with Ethereum Solana is that even though there's a lot of different projects, you kind of interact with it as if it were one chain, because it is on one chain. We don't have that in the Cosmos. I think that's what Cosmology is trying to get at, is to unify the developer experience, unify the user experience, such that you can have a chain agnostic experience and interact with the Cosmos and get all the benefits of interacting with different app chains on the Cosmos. So I think that from a DX side, we just have to continue what we're doing at Cosmology and kind of unifying things together as if they were one chain. So I think that's why a lot of people don't really see the value in Cosmos, because they focus on individual chains within the Cosmos and they're unable to kind of collectively understand the combined synergies of when these chains have these network effects within this own ecosystem. So I think siloing mentally each different chain as its own ecosystem is not great for Cosmos, is because people think Osmosis, Juno, Terra when they think of Cosmos, but when they think of Solana, Ethereum, they kind of think of everything that ecosystem touches. I wish it'd be the same for the Cosmos. And I think Cosmology, the approach that they've been taking by being friends with everybody in the ecosystem and kind of having this neutral position where we want to kind of bring and elevate everybody by sharing all these tools that can be used within the Cosmos. I think that continuing to do that and promoting others to do that as well within the dev tooling community, I think that will be a very strong play for Cosmos DX in general.
And let's say people want to try out CW scripts. Is there something or all the other tools you guys providing? Where would they start?
Well, we're going to have, it's not launched yet. There's some docs up for those who are kind of interested in kind of getting to know the syntax and getting to know some of the motivations and design goals, and also to give us feedback if possible it was going to be cwscript.com. They can find more there, but a lot of the stuff that we're planning to officially move onto Cosmology. So I think there'll be a section of the Cosmology site kind of dedicated to all the CW script stuff. And as we're merging, because we're kind of in the process of combining our two teams' projects into Cosmology's brand, I think that, so I can't say for certain for now, but definitely it will be available on the Cosmology site.
Cool. Thanks, Will, for all the intro into CW script and your new role at Cosmology.
Oh, thank you.
And thanks for updating us and being here. And let's talk when there's more to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.